is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Condemnation from around the world as the Russian military targets the biggest nuclear power station in Europe.
Moscow's advance on the strategically vital Black Sea port of Mykolaiv has been repelled, according to Ukraine.
Moscow blocks access to independent foreign news outlets, including the BBC and Deutsche Welle, further strangling freedom of speech in Russia.
And closed for business. More international corporations turn their backs on Russia with financial consequences for all sides.
Russian troops have seized Europe's largest nuclear plant in southeast Ukraine after a heavy assault by artillery.
The shelling caused a fire and triggered worldwide alarm at the prospect of a nuclear disaster, although officials say the site is now safe. This comes on the 9th day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. CGTN's correspondent Andrew Wilson reports.
The fire at the reactor has triggered an immediate and intense reaction around the world. Security cameras captured what appear to be magnesium flares landing above and around what is clearly part of the plant. Also released was this urgent appeal, the Zaporizhzhia spokesman appealing for the artillery fire to stop. Attention, he says. Russian military vehicles are shooting at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. There is a real and present danger, and this is a nuclear incident on the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe. We demand firing from heli-calibers on the nuclear power plant to stop. The call for a ceasefire was also to allow fire crews access to the blaze.
I think we call upon the Russian president to absolutely cease attacking sites such as that. It's incredibly dangerous. It's not just dangerous for Ukraine and the Russians, it's dangerous for Europe.
Beijing was also quick to respond.
We have noted relevant reports. China attaches great importance to nuclear safety issues and is seriously concerned about the safety and security situation of nuclear facilities in Ukraine.
As the Russian military blamed Ukrainian saboteurs, Ukraine's President Zelensky hit back, condemning the attack and invoking the memory of Chernobyl. The Chernobyl plant, also in Ukraine, caught fire in 1986. The reactor had a meltdown, causing the world's worst nuclear accident. Contamination was widespread and long-term. 31 people died within 3 months of their radioactive exposure, and many more afterwards. Reports suggest this fire may now be under control, but experts warn of the real dangers of warfare close to nuclear infrastructure.
When you have active military operations, including shelling, missiles, when you have active nuclear power plants, it's just a recipe for disaster. And all it takes is one missile that goes off, or like we see, some shelling that results in a fire. If the fire hadn't been contained at this power plant, it could have moved into the reactor area, and, we could have seen a meltdown.
The fires at the plant are out. The Zaporizhzhia plant is now under the control of Russian forces.
All the safety systems of the 6 reactors at the plant were not affected at all, and that there has been no release of radioactive material.
A narrow escape perhaps, but a reminder of the stakes in this war nonetheless. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
Professor Mike Fitzpatrick is a nuclear power expert at Coventry University. I asked for his assessment of the attack on the nuclear plant.
Firstly, it is worthwhile emphasising that there has not been significant damage to the nuclear plant, no release of radioactivity, no breach of any of the containment. And this looks like not an attack on the plant itself, but part of the military advance in securing Ukraine's infrastructure, so taking control of things like the nuclear plant that generate electricity. Now, that said, of course, using artillery anywhere near a nuclear plant is massively foolhardy, and there has been damage on the broader site itself to ancillary buildings, probably administration buildings. If one shell had gone astray, then we could be having a very different interpretation of what's happened.
And Russia is now in control of this nuclear plant, with reports that staff are working at gunpoint. What are the implications of Russia being in charge?
Well, what that means now is that they can effectively control the Ukraine electricity supply in that region. So the plant is a very large plant. It has 6 reactors on site. As far as we can tell, not all of them were operating at the time of the attack. Since the attack, more of the units have been taken offline. So it's not clear as to whether any of the reactors on site are still working. But what it means is that if, for instance, one of them is still operating, that Russia can now take that offline and cause disruption to the electricity supply as part of strengthening their hold on the area.
So put into context for us, if you can, how damaging any incident at this plant would be.
You have multiple levels of containment. So, these plants are very safe. If you do get any disruption to the cooling, they have multiple safety systems, so additional cooling can be injected, and they can even cool passively once the power has been turned. So the danger would have been is if in the attack on the plant that artillery shells could have penetrated the concrete shell, could even have damaged the pressure vessel, or even just caused enough damage to the cooling systems that you could have been in a situation like Fukushima, where even if the plant has temporarily been disrupted and shut down, that the heat that continues to come from the core in the hours and days after it's been shut down couldn't have been removed. So we could have been looking at very serious consequences. Fortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case.
And this plant isn't far from Chernobyl, of course, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. How concerning is it that this site is also now under the control of the Russians?
Okay, well, it has to be said that Chernobyl was a completely different design, and the circumstances that led to the Chernobyl incident were completely different. Sort of involving, effectively misuse of the reactor, not something that was a consequence of accident or anything to do with military action. I think that the fact that both are in the Ukraine, does immediately raise concerns in the eyes of the public. Could this happen again? I think that at this stage we can be very reassuring and say that's not going to be the case here. If there had been overnight a significant breach of the reactor, that would now be very clear. That's not what's happened.
Russia and Ukraine have agreed to the need for humanitarian corridors to move civilians to safety from the areas worst affected by the shelling.
It comes as 47 civilians are reported to have been killed in Russian airstrikes on the city of Chernihiv. Elsewhere, Russian troops are intensifying their attacks on the Black Sea port of Mykolaiv, although Ukraine says they are being repelled.
Well, Joseph Federman is a reporter with Associated Press in the city of Lviv in western Ukraine. Joseph, tell us more about these humanitarian corridors and how it might work out.
We are still waiting for details on how these corridors are going to work. What we've seen basically is an agreement in principle, but not a final agreement. They need to work out key details. How are the corridors going to work? Where are all of these people going to go? Now, we've heard just in the past hour or two, President Zelensky's office saying that talks are expected to continue perhaps as soon as tomorrow, where maybe they will hammer out these details. One thing that's important to note, we are not talking about ceasefire talks. We are not talking about peace talks. We are only talking about a humanitarian decision to allow people to flee cities. That's an indication that even heavier fighting could lie ahead for major cities.
It's a difficult picture to try and put together. I mean, what do we know about the latest Russian advances?
It's hard to focus on any particular battle because there are so many places seeing heavy fighting. We see it in the northeast, in Kharkiv. We see it in southern port cities. We see shelling of Kyiv, the capital. The big picture is that we see a Russian strategy emerging here. It is closing in multiple directions, from the north, from the east, from the south. Port cities severing the country, making it difficult to import and export things, closing in on the capital. The big picture is that Russia is moving in and trying to suffocate this country.
Can you give us any more information from what you know on the number of refugees now fleeing Ukraine?
We are seeing the UN already has confirmed over 1 million people have left. That's about 2% of Ukraine's entire population. Some estimates are as high as 1.2 million, and they're predicting it could reach as high as 4 million. So we're talking about a huge humanitarian disaster that's unfolding here. There are multiple issues that you have to deal with. The immediate concern is just getting people to safety and keeping them out of the cold and feeding them and so forth. But then you have other issues. Where are children going to go to school? Where are people going to live? Are they going to be allowed to work? Where are they going to settle down? So many decisions for the international community to make in the coming months.
Joseph, Russian forces have targeted civilians. Can Moscow really be trusted to honor the safety in the event of these humanitarian corridors being set up?
That is going to depend on what comes out of these talks in the coming days. Obviously, Ukraine is going to want very strong assurances because what you see across the board when you speak to people here is absolute no trust in Moscow. They do not understand why their country was attacked, and they do not trust the Russians to protect them if they do flee. So many difficult decisions lie ahead of us in the coming days.
Joseph Federman with the Associated Press in western Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Vladimir usually runs a consultancy firm, but he's now serving in the Kyiv Territorial Defence Force. We're not using his full name or his location to protect him. I asked him to explain the situation on the ground where he is.
Where Ukrainian forces have been able to get to our invaders, they have responded very well. In fact, we can clearly see that Russia has not won any direct battles or interactions with the Ukrainian forces. In fact, wherever they were held off and even pushed back on the regular front. The problem is that we're being attacked from basically 3 sides out of 4 from a variety of locations, and obviously the army is has not been covering every part of our border. So in certain parts, the Russian forces were able to get into some smaller cities and villages and capture them. However, without supply lines, that's definitely is just a matter of time before they run out of gas and ammunition. So since Russia is obviously failing in direct wars, they're just moved on to using missile strikes and air strikes on civilian districts, and that's really troublesome.
Do you think that we're going to see a situation where Russian forces will try to put Ukrainian cities under siege?
Well, they've been trying to do that, but like I said, it's really hard to put someone under siege when your supply lines are cut off, and that's what's happening. So Russia has obviously failed its quick blitzkrieg, right? And now it's trying to move into a more passive or day-to-day regular war, and it's running out of its supplies. It's running out of its people. There have been reports that it has already deployed like 90% of the troops that were around it. The amount of joint support and help that has been in the cities is quite big. So we're definitely able to hold on longer than those soldiers, enemy soldiers, who are staying out in the cold and hungry and without supply lines.
Foreign ministers from NATO member states have been holding a special session in Brussels to discuss Ukraine. The G7 and European Union are also meeting. The head of NATO warned that the Russian invasion had shattered peace in Europe. Let's talk now to our correspondent Rebecca Bunden in Brussels. Rebecca, what else has Jens Stoltenberg had to say?
Yes, sadly, Mr. Stoltenberg, NATO's chief, warned that the situation is only likely to get worse over the next few days as Russia continues with its attacks. And Ukraine's foreign minister called on NATO to act now before it's too late. Sadly, however, as well, NATO's powers are very limited in this situation. It is a defensive alliance, we have to remember, and there is the fact that Ukraine is not a member of NATO, which has meant that it hasn't been sending troops into Ukraine. There are no NATO troops on the ground there, and there are no plans to send troops into the country. Mr. Stoltenberg of NATO is saying that NATO is not seeking any conflict with Russia. What NATO has been doing, however, is sending troops into the Eastern Alliance. Its member countries in the eastern areas, including Poland, Estonia, and so on. That's something that it has been doing. But Mr. Stoltenberg explained that NATO really, at this point in time, has to defend those countries, defend its allies, protect them, to avoid any potential spillover, the conflict spreading to other parts, other countries, which would be a very, very dangerous situation. He is very concerned about the security situation. Let's have a listen.
Russia's aggression has created a new normal for our security, where fundamental principles are contested through the use of force, and we face the threat of conflict for years to come. There is much at stake: how we organize relations between states, whether democracy or authoritarianism prevails, and ultimately what sort of world we want to live in.
And significantly, two non-NATO states, Finland and Sweden, attended the talks in Brussels. What more can you tell us?
Yes, that's absolutely right, and this is a really interesting development because, it goes back to that point that Ukraine not being a member of NATO, it's meant that NATO hasn't been able to send troops into the country, and now other countries are watching the situation very closely, including Finland and Sweden. Now, Finland actually borders Russia, so that's raised its concerns, and a few weeks ago we wouldn't have imagined policymakers actually talking about the possibility of joining NATO. But a poll a few days ago showed a shift in public opinion that more than half of people in Finland are actually keen for Finland to potentially join NATO. So there has been this shift, and it's interesting that President Putin has been trying to divide the alliance, trying to weaken it, but in fact it seems to be resulting only in a strengthening of the alliance.
Rebecca, thanks for that. Rebecca Bunden, our correspondent in Brussels.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Russia condemned around the world for targeting nuclear power stations in Ukraine. We're in Moscow next.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But When the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Russia's president has said the campaign in Ukraine is going according to plan. In a televised government meeting, Vladimir Putin warned countries against launching further sanctions on Russia, saying they would backfire. Let's talk now to our correspondent Giles Gibson in Moscow. So, Giles, what more has Putin said about Ukraine, and how is it being reported in Russia?
Yeah, we saw President Vladimir Putin appearing via video link from his residence just outside Moscow, claiming that Russia has no bad intentions towards its neighbours. This claim coming from Vladimir Putin at the same time that we've seen UK intelligence reporting that they are seeing evidence that the Russian military is shelling civilian targets inside that southern city in Ukraine of Mariupol. In terms of how this is being reported here in Russia, of course, Vladimir Putin's comments being aired as usual on state-controlled TV, but we are also at the same time seeing this extraordinary crackdown on independent media here in Russia. You have the BBC Russian service, that website, its website not accessible anymore here in Russia. You also have the Echo of Moscow radio channel, a really well-known established radio channel being taken off the airwaves. That too happening to TV Rain, another independent channel, and they actually used their final few moments of broadcasting before closing down to send a bit of a message. They played out Swan Lake, the famous ballet, and that is a reference that many Russians will understand immediately, because that is exactly what was played out by state TV back in 1991 when the military was trying to overthrow then-President Mikhail Gorbachev.
And Giles, the Russian Parliament's been voting on new restrictions on so-called fake news.
Yeah, that's right. We've had both chambers of the Russian Parliament approving this new legislation that basically means if you are found guilty of spreading fake news, as far as the Russian authorities are concerned, about the Russian armed forces, then you could be liable for some sort of a fine or even up to 15 years in prison. That legislation, as far as we know, hasn't actually been signed by the Russian president yet. In the meantime, we also have the Kremlin, President Putin's spokesperson, denying these reports that the country is about to have martial law declared. Dmitry Peskov, the president's spokesperson, saying that those reports are a hoax. But we have had news of multiple Russian men, including those, of course, who would be of conscription age, deciding that they are now going to flee the country, go to a neighbouring country perhaps, because they fear martial law will be declared, they fear being conscripted into the Russian military, or even just that the country's borders could be closed in the next few days or so.
Giles, many thanks. Giles Gibson there in Moscow.
Well, Moscow's invasion of Ukraine has triggered an unprecedented number of companies to withdraw from Russia. They include banks, tech companies and energy giants like BP, Shell and ExxonMobil.
For some companies, this marks the end of ties that have lasted for more than 2 decades. Our correspondent Karina Huber reports.
Boeing announced this week it is suspending services to Russian airlines. Ford is halting its Russian operations, and Harley-Davidson won't be shipping its bikes there.
This is very unprecedented, especially for an economy the size and scale of the 12th largest economy in the world, which is Russia.
Russia says foreign companies are caving to political pressure, and it has implemented capital controls designed to prevent them from being able to sell their Russian assets. Tech companies are also cutting ties with Russia. Apple announced it is stopping Russian sales of its products, causing Russian consumers to reportedly pay eye-popping premiums on devices bought online before they become totally unavailable.
It's great to see yet another of the big global companies pulling out of Russia. However, they are also in the very fortunate position that, given their scale, Russia is a relatively small part of their overall income. For some other companies that are exposed to the Russian market, pulling out of that particular territory is a major, major decision.
It's a major decision primarily for the oil and gas industry, which has substantial investments in Russia. But energy companies are pulling out too.
ExxonMobil, whose Russian operations are valued at more than $4 billion, joined other energy giants like BP and Shell this week in announcing their exit from Russia. This marks the end of a 25-year relationship.
In a statement, the company said, "We deplore Russia's military action that violates the territorial integrity of Ukraine and endangers its people." European energy companies, which are more dependent on Russia, will face even greater losses from pulling out of the country. But experts say there's also a cost associated with doing business with Russia right now.
Reputational damage can really cripple you. And all CEOs are very well aware of, let's say, their brand value. And that brand value is tied into the sentiment that are being held not only by young people, but, people everywhere about your corporate behavior.
With all eyes on Ukraine right now, experts say companies might have to reconsider their engagement with Russia. Karina Huber, CGTN.
So many companies around the world cutting ties with Russia. Wall Street's main indices opened in the red. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, what was the reaction there to the attack on Europe's largest nuclear plant?
Well, it's interesting, Jamie and Robin, because late last night when we started getting word of what was going on over here, it seemed to be very bad and people were very, very nervous. So the Dow futures plunged by around 400 points, and it's only got worse, actually, in the last couple of hours. We have the Dow down 485 now, NASDAQ 295, S&P 500 down by 71 points. And what has happened, of course, is it's now become clear that they were shelling what looks like a training center slightly off-site. So at first blush, okay, yeah, that's not quite as serious, but the problem, of course, is what happens if one of those shells goes astray. And we've never had a war around so many nuclear facilities. There are 4 of them in Ukraine alone, including the now defunct Chernobyl plant. And I think that is what's rattling Wall Street. What happens if this war goes on and gets closer to other nuclear plants? And indeed, I don't think Wall Street thinks that anybody, including the Russians, wants to actually cause any kind of nuclear catastrophe. But what if there's an accidental one? That is the problem. So money coming out of stocks again, going into bonds. We've got a surge there for those safe havens. The interest rate on the 10-year up to almost 1.8%, so the price is coming down. Money's going into commodities like gold and to wheat and copper and palladium and that sort of thing. And each buyer, of course, is paying a premium for those safe havens at the moment, or safe havens as they see them, so that keeps pushing the prices ever further up. And the big one for us here in America is gas. Now, gas or petrol is at $4 a gallon in New York, much more than $4 a gallon in California. I think it's above $4 in 7 other states. And it went up, the price of a gallon of petrol went up by 11 cents just overnight, according to Gas Buddy and to the AAA, the AAA here. The average is expected to be $4.25 next week. It's $3.84 now. And this, of course, is all very inflationary. Now, on Wednesday, we had the Federal Reserve saying there will be a 25 basis point hike on the 16th of March, 0.25%. That was welcomed by the markets because of the stability that it offered them, although that was short term. But people here now are talking about inflation being 10%. 10%, whereas the Fed's target is 2%. It's quite a difference.
Let's just talk about another economic barometer, John. New jobs data out in the United States.
Yes. Well, on any other occasion, this would be good news. But unfortunately, on this occasion, I'm afraid it's a little bit confused. And I should say, of course, this is a bounce back, remember. These jobs have been put on in February, but it's really a bounce back from the COVID era. So 678,000 jobs put on, whereas 400,000 have been expected. That's good. The unemployment rate down to 3.8%. That's a two-year low. The trouble is, Jamie and Robin, these figures don't include Ukraine. And there's the but, unfortunately. These figures come from a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, there are 10 million open jobs in America at this time, and employers are facing real difficulty filling vacant positions because many people just don't seem to want to come back to work. There are supply chain issues, and of course they can't pass on the costs. In a lot of cases, corporations really can't pass on the costs because of the inflationary times that we actually live in at the moment. If you look under the hood or the bonnet, the fundamentals of the US economy are okay. Plenty of money for corporations, plenty of money even in consumer coffers as well. But the big unknown is what is the Ukraine effect? And Jerome Powell said that on Wednesday when he spoke on the Congress, and that is the problem. You know, good jobs report on the face of it, but we just don't know what the effect of all this fighting is going to be.
John, in ordinary times, this would be a headline news, a deal reached with the Sackler family over America's terrible opioid crisis, but it's not getting much coverage anywhere, really.
Well, it is on CGTN, isn't it? And that's what we're for, really. I mean, this is a story that I've done a lot of work on this over my 20 years here, and it is a crisis that involves middle-class, reasonably well-off people, and it's hidden. You know, you don't see it. It took place and is taking place behind closed doors. And in just one sentence, what happened was the authorities here changed the rules for doctors prescribing highly addictive opioid drugs. Used to be only that you could get them for cancer. Now you can get them for a finger ache or a backache or whatever. The problem is that those pills ended up in grandma's medicine cabinet. Teenagers found them, tried them, got addicted. There's your crisis right there. Many drug companies recklessly marketed these opioid drugs, including Purdue Pharma, which is based in Connecticut to the north of New York City. And now what has happened? There was a settlement. It was challenged by many states and local governments, and now there's a new settlement, and these are the terms. So the Sackler family, which owns Purdue, has agreed to pay $6 billion in reparations that will go towards creating a new company, a new entity. They will give up control of Purdue. They will also not object to any buildings that have their names on being renamed. They will apologize, which is something they actually haven't done up till now. And in return, they won't be sued in civil court. In theory, in America, they could face criminal charges down the road, but there are none on the docket at the moment. So it's quite an historic day, and as you say, something worth reporting, particularly for those millions of people who lost loved ones, particularly young people, because they were addicted to these opioid drugs, meant to help people, but turned round and did a lot of damage,
John, thanks for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Switching off and logging out. Russia stops access to foreign news organisations, including the BBC and Deutsche Welle.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Condemnation from around the world as the Russian military targets the biggest nuclear power station in Europe.
Moscow's advance on the strategically vital Black Sea port of Mykolaiv has been repelled, according to Ukraine.
Moscow blocks access to independent foreign news outlets, including the BBC and Deutsche Welle. BBC has just announced it's temporarily suspended the work of all of its journalists and support staff within Russia.
And we'll have more on that story in just a few moments. First, more countries are organising flights to move refugees as the number of people fleeing across the border continues to grow.
The United Nations says the number of people who've left the country in the past week has risen to 1.2 million. Let's talk now to our correspondent Ryan Thompson, who's in the city of Lublin, close to the Ukrainian border. So, Ryan, what kind of numbers of refugees are you now seeing crossing into Poland?
Well, Poland is taking in a majority of these people who are displaced, seeking some type of refuge across the border in the European Union. The latest estimate today from Ukraine's ambassador in France is that that number is now over 700,000 people, a massive number, and it is going to climb more and more. Estimates that we've heard from people here in Poland is that for the collective region, including countries like Hungary, Slovakia, it is likely in a couple weeks' time to count more than 4-5 million people who are displaced, seeking refuge in the European Union. It is going to be a huge effort. You can see a number of donations being collected behind me to make sure that these people who are fleeing with nothing behind them, with nothing with them, have something to carry on and arrive in Poland.
And Ryan, there is some concern, isn't there, about the foreign nationals trapped in Ukraine, many of them students. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, for Ukrainians getting across the border, it is a long wait, but it seems to be going relatively smooth. They are getting here, they are getting assisted once across the border. That hasn't exactly been heard to be the same for a number of foreign nationals, students especially. We've heard reports of African students struggling to get into the European Union and actually having to be rerouted with the assistance of their consulate back to their home country. But we've also heard positive stories. In the case of Romania, for example, there's one town that has taken in over 2,000 Indian students in a large procurement scheme where they have been settled, given space to stay, while they await what their next steps will be. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but overall, we do see a little bit of problems for some of the foreign nationals trying to enter the European Union. Not so smooth here.
Ryan Thompson in Lublin in Poland, thank you very much.
Well, our reporting on the refugee crisis caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues throughout the weekend.
Stephen Cole will be speaking to Catherine Mahoney from the UNHCR Refugee Agency, who told him it's the millions displaced who are still in Ukraine that are causing most concern.
We all know that we've seen these images. We know that people are hunkered down in bomb shelters, in basements, and subway systems. And the reality is that my colleagues, the humanitarians, and everybody else that are there to try to meet the immense needs inside the country, if the bombs are falling, we also have to take shelter. If we cannot guarantee safe passage, safety for us to be able to deliver aid, it's very hard for us to get an accurate picture in this fluid, violent, insecure situation. So the reality is that we don't exactly know how many folks are in need. We know that the needs are immense. We know that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have been uprooted from their homes, that have moved from different parts of the country to find safety elsewhere. Let's not forget, anybody who's been forced to flee because of violence is going to try to stay as close to home as the fighting will allow. But until the violence stops, we don't really have an accurate picture, and we need safety for the humanitarians trying to help Ukrainians on the ground.
And you can see more of that interview on The Agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
Russia has cut access to several foreign news outlets, including the BBC and Deutsche Welle. Moscow is also threatening jail terms of up to 15 years for anyone publishing stories it deems false. Well, CGTN's Duncan Hooper is watching the information war for us. First of all, tell us about these latest developments.
Yes, Jamie, a couple of things have happened today. The first one, as you mentioned, widely expected. Russia has banned the BBC alongside Deutsche Welle, the German broadcaster, and a number of other sites, including Medusa, which is a website based in Latvia. And this was expected because last week the EU said it would ban RT. And it was indeed one of the arguments that were put forward by opponents of this ban, who said, if this happens, the retaliation means that Russian audiences will be deprived of genuine independent news sources. The other thing that's happened today is that the Russian State Duma has passed a law which will mandate up to 15 years in prison for anyone accused of spreading misinformation. And misinformation, of course, is anything that differs from the official Russian narrative carried by the government. And that has had the effect of really squeezing out the last of the independent Russian media organisations.
So for people in Russia wanting to access independent news sources, what's left for them?
Well, I'd recommend they tune into CGTN, Robin, which is alongside a handful of other international broadcasters still available. Otherwise, there's the Telegram social media app. The government in Russia did try to ban that. They weren't successful. But the problem with that for everyday users, viewers, is that it's completely unregulated. So as well as being uncensored, it does carry all kinds of material, propaganda, misinformation, as well as serious media sources. So aside from those two options, you need to be a little bit tech savvy and use a piece of software called a VPN, a virtual private network. And what that allows you to do is to connect to the internet as though you're connecting from another country. Now, technically that's illegal, but it's very difficult for the authorities to track down, so it's believed to be widely used. If you're not quite up to that level of technology, the BBC today announced that it's going to start shortwave radio broadcasting of its World Service. Now, shortwave radio was very widely used during the Second World War, during the Cold War, and this broadcast will be available. They're primarily targeted at Ukraine, but they'll also be available in parts of Russia. This was after you saw maybe the images earlier this week of the TV mast being destroyed by fire. So as that limited the broadcast of domestic services, the BBC said, look, we need to step in, we need to do something that can't be blocked, and that is the old-fashioned way.
Duncan, thank you. We shall no doubt talk to you more in coming days. The United Nations Security Council is holding an emergency session after the Russian attack on Europe's largest nuclear plant. We can take you there now live. This is the live feed from New York. Earlier this week, the United Nations General Assembly voted overwhelmingly for a resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine and called for the immediate withdrawal of its forces. I think we might be able to just listen in just to a few moments of this debate. So let's listen in now.
We cannot hear you.
I think we might be between speakers. As you can imagine, lots of countries will want to contribute to this this debate, but there they are in live session in the United Nations, and we might come back to that a little later in the
We're going to start with our
programme.
list of speakers and then come back to him when connection is re-established. I'd like to therefore invite those council members who wish to make statements, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and I'd like to thank Under-Secretary-General De Carlo for her briefing, and we look forward to hearing the briefing from Mr. Grossi. The United Kingdom and our partners called this urgent meeting because Russian forces last night attacked the largest nuclear power station in Europe. We're grateful to the Ukrainian firefighters and authorities who got the fire under control and are working bravely to ensure that the plant remains safe. We support the work of the IAEA in Ukraine and are relieved that so far they have reported that none of the safety systems in the plant was affected and that there was no release of radioactive material. Colleagues, this is the first time that a state has attacked a fueled and functioning nuclear power plant. International law requires special protection for nuclear facilities, and it is difficult to see how Russia's actions were compatible with its commitments under Article 56 of the Additional Protocol of the Geneva's Conventions. It must not happen again. Even in the midst of an illegal invasion of Ukraine, Russia must keep fighting away from and protect the safety and security of nuclear sites. Colleagues, President Putin said yesterday that the special military operation, or as everyone else calls it, the war, was going to plan. Everyone around this table knows that is not true. President Putin misjudged the strength, resilience and will of the Ukrainian people to his invasion. He underestimated the world's condemnation of his actions. 141 votes in the General Assembly and the unprecedented sanctions on Russia demonstrate the strength of the global response. Every day this war continues. The destruction it brings to Ukraine, the suffering it inflicts on Ukrainian and Russian people, and the risks it poses to international peace and security increase. This must stop. We call on Russia to end this violence, withdraw its troops, and enter into serious peace negotiations. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I will now try and give the floor to Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi to give his briefing to the Council.
Thank you, Madam President. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Well, you've been watching live coverage from the United Nations here on CGTN. The United Kingdom called this special session of the UN General Assembly, and we heard the opening speech there from the United Kingdom's ambassador to the United Nations, Barbara Woodward. She called the meeting, she said, because this was the first time a state, a nation, had attacked a functioning nuclear power plant. She called President Putin's military operation a war. Of course, the United Nations General Assembly may well deplore President Putin's actions, but it's unlikely that their words are going to change much on the ground. But the live coverage there from the United Nations General Assembly, more of which later here on CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Tomorrow's world in Barcelona. We'll be getting an insight into the new tech we'll all soon be using.
this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tense here. Bottles are being thrown. As they do so,
there are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
It's the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Well, China is setting out its future economic plans amid the international turmoil of the Ukraine crisis. China's top political advisory body has opened its annual session in Beijing.
Thousands of delegates will set out the country's plans for the coming year. Known as the two sessions, the CPPCC and the NPC are the most important events in China's political calendar. Export businesses around the world will be watching China's economic plans closely. For Greece, the country's famous marble industry is a big part of the economy. Exports to China have been steadily rising and now account for around half the total market.
Marble exports played a huge part, saving Greece from bankruptcy a decade ago. Our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas reports.
Standing on the highest hill in Athens, the Parthenon was built 25 centuries ago, dedicated to the goddess Athena. The ruins of the present-day UNESCO heritage site have survived several wars, the rise and fall of empires, and natural disasters. Today, the marble used to build these structures is contributing significantly to the country's economy.
The marble industry in Greece is very important for the country's economy. Marble is in the top 10 exports of our products, and that's because our focus is to send it abroad. To illustrate just how important it is, for every dollar of marble we produce, we contribute about $2.2 to the economy, so that's more than double. We export to a number of countries around the world. We like to say that marble is one of the best products we export.
The sector employs 6,500 workers who are directly involved in the primary sector and some 18,000 workers in the secondary sector. If we put that into dollars, it translates into $1.5 billion in global demand for Greek marble. During Greece's recent financial crisis, the sector faced many challenges that forced it to look beyond its borders to survive. Now about 50% of Greece's exportable marble goes to China, with the rate reaching 80% when it comes to raw, unprocessed marble. So this batch right next to me will end up probably being either a staircase, a fancy floor, or even a beautiful vase in some Chinese city.
Η αλήθεια είναι ότι εξάγουμε μάρμαρα στην Κίνα εδώ και 30 χρόνια. We've been exporting Greek marble to China for over 30 years, but the numbers started to really increase after 2005, when the Chinese government opened up its markets and cut down on bureaucracy. Many of the companies in China that import from us buy raw, unprocessed marble, and either they use it for domestic projects or they resell it. I have to say that taking over the Chinese market with our marble is a Greek success story.
They say that Greek history is carved in marble, but as the numbers show, so is the Greek economy. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
The opening ceremony for the Beijing Winter Paralympics has been held at the National Stadium, the Bird's Nest.
Blossoming of life was the theme. China has 96 athletes competing. It's the largest ever Paralympics delegation. The Games will run until the 13th of March.
Here's the lowdown on all the technology we might be using in the future. Artificial intelligence is one technology being explored at this year's Mobile World Congress in Barcelona.
Powered by 5G, it'll also give a boost to the so-called Internet of Things, which is how devices talk to each other. Our correspondent Rahul Pathak reports.
The impact that artificial intelligence will have on our society in the future is predicted by experts to be bigger than anything previously experienced so far in the technological field. Whilst this may sound like something from a science fiction movie, it's already very much part of our daily lives. Everything from driverless cars, remote surgery to facial recognition software. Machine learning is at the heart of AI developments. Tasks previously carried out by humans can now be done by computers in less time and at a fraction of the cost. Big tech has already poured billions of dollars into the industry, with Google, Apple, Amazon and Microsoft at the forefront.
So there's a key concept right now in AI as a key focus of our research, which is about making AI more generalized. It's making AI more accessible to people, because instead of creating AI from scratch, you can customize one of these AI models to your particular task or domain in any industry that you are targeting.
AI and the Internet of Things, or IoT as it's known, is being driven by new technology, and that is 5G. The new bandwidth brings fresh opportunities, and that is what is allowing this new digital revolution to happen.
A great example of 5G and AI working together is with urban air mobility, or driverless taxis. South Korea has one of the most advanced 5G networks in the world. That technology gives these systems the capacity to operate remotely. SK Telecom is hoping their air taxis will be fully operational by 2025.
The big cities like Seoul or New York, we have so much problem on the transportation. There are heavy traffic and we have so much time stuck in the traffic. So by utilizing this urban air mobility, this will improve a lot of our environment, like a living environment. And at the same time, we can also reduce the carbon emission.
Huge technological changes also bring huge challenges, not least from an ethical point of view. How much control does society cede to computers? There are also issues of privacy, transparency and equality to grapple with. What is certain is that this technological revolution is on the horizon and change is coming. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Barcelona.
The headlines again. Condemnation from around the world as the Russian military targets the biggest nuclear power station in Europe. Ukraine says 5 people died in the attack.
Moscow's advance on the strategically vital Black Sea port of Mykolaiv has been repelled, according to Ukraine.
Moscow blocks access to independent foreign news outlets, including the BBC and Deutsche Welle. The BBC is temporarily suspending the work of all journalists and support staff within Russia.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on Smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.